thanks. One right after the other. It's great fun. Well, welcome. It's great to have you. Checking out your work has been I love the excuse to look at people's work, right? And to see two exceptional talents have a chance to have a conversation with me is great. In looking at your, both of you are not American born, right? Each of you was born in sort of another country. So you bring a whole different sort of cultural experience, history, family history to the work, which I think is really important to have a conversation about. And I wonder, in terms of when you take a look at your work within the context of, the oeuvre that you're in, how important is that to not only what you would create, but how you create it?
So I was born in Mexico, and I grew up there till I was 7. I think inherently your environment is going to dictate and influence you as a human being, culturally, psychologically, visually. And for me, I'm more of I call myself an emotional photographer and more of a picture maker and not a picture taker. And in that sense, actually it wasn't until a recent trip to Mexico that I realized how much of my work is influenced by my culture. I love color and flowers, and there's a mysticism that is inherent in the culture that I believe comes through in my work as well. So I think who you are is going to inherently be part of your work and whatever you're interested in as well. So for me, my culture is definitely in it, even though I feel I'm definitely more American now. But the first 7 years of your life are pretty influential, and they come through your subconscious. And a lot of my work comes from the subconscious, so definitely I think that growing up in Mexico has influenced the color palette and texture of my work.
How about you, Krishna?
After listening to Javiera, I'm a little confused. I'm not really sure who I am in that context, because I come from India, and a lot of people sort of classify me as being a black and white photographer. So I wonder, looking back, does India lack color? Is it very black and white? I think it's a very individual thing for me. Really is. I grew up in black and white, and which is why I shoot black and white primarily. So I was being a little facetious, Javiera, but I started with film, and I shot black and white mainly. So that influenced a lot of my thinking and a lot of my visual development. But it was kind of curious because about a year back, someone introduced me as a black and white photographer, and I said, wait a minute, haven't you seen my color work? And I showed her my color work, and she was very surprised. So I think it's a process of development. You might start at one point, and you might end up going in a different direction. And ironically, Amadou thinks I'm a traditional photographer, and yet I feel I discovered color because of digital photography. So it's just a set of contradictions that seem to be there, but to me, they're a very natural progression.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I started with film, black and white film, and I think that there's a life to a picture that exists solely within the frame, right? And the way you see it with your naked eye is completely different to how it exists within that rectangle, right? And when you start with black and white, that is an opportunity to start to learn the language of photography. And when you're doing it in black and white, it comes down to contrast, light and shadow, line and shape, gesture. If you learn that, if you learn the fundamental of that, the inclusion of color becomes a little easier, because color can be so dominating that at some point the shot becomes about the color, but everything that makes it a good photograph is lost, right? and you work a lot with color for your imagery. What role does color play in terms of how you sort of, especially you're doing a lot of conceptual stuff, right? So you may be thinking about, oh, I want to work with these materials or with these figures, and you're thinking in terms of what the photograph looks like, but what role is color playing in terms of how you were envisioning it, especially when you kind of understand the fact that it's going to live on a print, and that how the color is on a print as opposed to a screen is completely different. Talk to me about that thought process.
Well, let me be clear. I do shoot a lot of black and white as well. I'm not just a color photographer. And I do think that learning black and white film photography is very important to learn the basics of photography, and it's still a love of mine. And, you know, my work, when I first began creating it, was very, very muted and dark and contrasty, and this was like, I think 2011 or 12 is when I came into color. And it was really a very decisive moment for me because I had been going through a lot of transformation, is what I'll say, during that time. And for me, photography is a healing modality. Every single body of work that I do the intention is always like a psychological healing session for myself or for others. And so I was in a place where I wanted more color in my life, not only just in photography, but literally in my life. So I am the way that I do color is, I just imagine, like, for example, my latest body of work, the cactus with the colored gels that are over the lens. So I took these very monochromatic, stark desert landscapes, and with colored gels, turned them into what the series is called chromatic alchemy. And for me, that was transmuting a very painful relationship into beauty, which is, I would say, a lot of the themes of my work is turning pain into beauty. And so I wanted to, like the desert, where it's arid and dry, yet life still thrives in this environment. And just like humans, if we're put into these arid environments, we create these like metaphysical, thorns to protect ourselves, right? Depending on our childhoods. And so for me, color is very healing, and it holds a vibration, and each color creates an emotion. So blue is healing, orange is, passion, and red is invigorating, pink is love. So that's how I think of color, more like an emotional landscape. Did I answer your question?
No.
Okay.
You're good. Years ago, I worked as an editor at Outdoor Photographer. And there was this was early on, I guess, Instagram or Flickr. And I discovered a photographer who had been photographing extensively in India. And then we had a meeting one time, and they said, oh, we want to do, they wanted to do a spread on India, but they wanted to focus on northern India, which at the time, which I didn't realize, is less photographed than southern India, at least in terms of the Western world. And I know that northern India is primarily where you have sort of photographed. Share the distinction and what makes that particular region of the country unique and attractive to you as a photographer.
Well, I find most of Indian culture very fascinating because of its variety. What most people don't realize is just linguistically, we've got something like about over 30 languages that are completely distinct, and these are languages, they are not dialects. So two people speaking those languages will not understand each other. They're so completely distinct. There are at least about 16 to 17 major scripts that you really will not understand unless someone formally teaches you those. So the variety is just fascinating. And I am drawn to all aspects of Indian culture. I've done a fair amount of photography in South India as well, but mostly in North India because that's where I happen to spend most of my time. But there's also an aspect of India that fascinates me, and that is the history, which I've usually tried to capture. And that's really what I've been chasing, typically because there's been a continuity of a lot of that culture. So if I look at my pictures from Delhi, I have really tried to capture a part of the Indian heritage that has continued at least for the last 400 years in Delhi. You go to some of the old mosques in what is called Old Delhi, and you'll see people there praying there and doing things that were done a few hundred years back when the mosque was built. And that to me is an absolutely fascinating aspect. You go to another part of Delhi where there is the shrine of a Sufi mystic. That shrine has been there for roughly about 800 years. And you still see people worshipping over there, much as they did, 500 or 600 years back after the Sufi died, because that's very much part of North Indian tradition, even crossing cultural barriers. And that's a very significant statement because today, over the last 10 years or so, Indian society has become very polarized over religion. But what is fascinating is that regardless of whether you were Hindu or Muslim, people went to worship at shrines of these Sufis who sort of had this Muslim connection, but they rose above that, and there was this unity in that. I know people who are extremely conservative, right-wing Hindus, supporting Hindu nationalism, but they do go to the shrines of these Sufis to pray for being blessed, for good luck, whatever. And that's really what I try to sort of capture. But it's not so much as setting myself an assignment and saying, this is what I'm going to go and do there today. It's going there and really being inspired by it and just shooting very randomly and very fast.
Your work is often about collaboration, especially with the nudes that you've produced, with people who may look like models, but they're not models, right? They're people who normally would never consider being photographed.
They're like mostly my friends that I tried to get naked.
But that whole idea of collaboration, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they think about these kinds of photographs, they're thinking about the aesthetics of making the photograph, lighting, composition. But, you're asking someone to be incredibly vulnerable in front of you. And for anyone who makes a portrait of anyone, whether it's like a nude or a street portrait, there is a collaboration, whether the duration of that shoot is a couple of minutes or a couple hours. But talk to me about the importance of you as a person, not just as a photographer, being able to create that sort of safe space for someone.
Well, I think I have an inherent advantage being a woman shooting women. So that's number one. And two, I always say to people that have never shot nude with me, I tell them it's a healing session because it is very vulnerable to expose yourself. And, people are very critical of themselves and their bodies and all of that. So I always want to encourage them to be as free and comfortable as possible and to know that they're beautiful, because whoever's in front of my lens, I think, is the most beautiful person to me. Like, something changes behind the lens. Not that they're not beautiful in front, they are too, but it's almost like you get to see them clearer. because they're in focus. You're focusing on them, and a lot of times I've had women cry or share, traumatic stories, or it does end up being like a therapy session too. So if someone's not that comfortable, I try to get them to like take a deep breath and relax. But for the most part, most of the women I shoot are comfortable nude because it does show in the photograph if they're awkward. I've shot a couple of people that if you're not comfortable in your own skin, you're going to see that. So I try to find people that are comfortable in their own skin, first of all, and second of all, it's also important that I find a muse and not a model. And that's the collaboration, and that's the big difference. So I am always on the hunt for a muse, and they're like unicorns, they're hard to come by, but when you find them, you'll know my muses because I'll have like 30 images of them because they're just so easy to shoot. And the thing about a muse is they get out of it just as much as you get out of it. Like, they love having their photo taken, and they're moving in a way that like I don't even tell them to. So it's good to find a muse. I recommend if you're trying to shoot a nude.
And how do you find the experience? You go back to India, I think, like once a year, at
Right.
least to make
Right.
photographs. And I know for me, when I've traveled abroad, especially when I've traveled to developing countries, that the experience is very jarring to go from that and here, right? Because it's just like we have so much access to everything here, and I go back, and it helps to just shift my perspective and priorities. But for you as a photographer, as a creative, when you go back and you return each year, how does your normal day-to-day life here, when you go back there, how do you feel that that's sort of shaping the way that you see it and the way you photograph it?
I don't think it really affects my photography, and really after living outside of India for about 5 or 6 years, it stopped affecting me. It's like I'm just going from one natural zone to another natural zone. I'm equally comfortable in both, and I've stopped kind of going through that transitional phase that I used to when I first left India. But in terms of how it impacts my photography, it's very significant because I do see what I shoot over here is in a very different style, both compositionally and in terms of color. I probably tend to do more color work. My son lives in Brooklyn, and I've been visiting him about once a year. And I see him doing a lot more color work in Brooklyn than I did in India. So that's kind of strange, but it's self-discovery. It's not intended, it's not planned. So it's a strange kind of transition.
For me, when I make photographs, like I took a trip to Japan. My first trip to Japan was in 2019, and immediately when I got back, I took a look at what I shot, and it was all shit, right? And I realized it was just too soon, that I needed time between making the photographs to actually being able to evaluate them for what they were. And I realized that distance of sort of time is really essential for me to sort of really get a sense of what the hell I was doing. I'd like for both of you sort of speak in terms of that process between the actual capture, living with the work for a while, and then sort of kind of figuring out what was it that you actually created during shooting, because I think sometimes it has to germinate in order for you to get a complete understanding of what you've actually made.
Yeah, I struggle with that one because I let things germinate for a really long time. There's like gardens growing everywhere. I have like projects upon projects upon projects that are germinating. And so I think like right now I have a 5-year project that I'm finally going to complete this week, which I'm really excited about. But I think it's really important for the work to breathe. And, you know, I personally, for myself, don't believe in procrastination because I'm not a procrastinator. So anytime I'm hesitating, I know that that's a sign that I'm waiting for more information for me, because I move really quick. Like, I can create a body of work quickly. And so my process is to slow down, which is why I shoot film, because it slows me down and I have to, it forces me to. And, you know, sometimes you have to sit with work for a while to know if it's good. Like, specifically when I was doing collage work, I would have the collage out and I would look at it, and then I'd come back the next day and I'd look at it, move a piece, come back the next day. And it could be like 3 or 4 months before I felt satisfied with that piece. So I think it just depends on the piece and the work. But I think, you know, time will tell you when it's ready. What do you think?
I work in a very different way. I frequently have a very good idea about a good picture I've shot and one that I'm going to be happy with. And just to give you an example, there's a picture I shot, and I remember it still very specifically. It was in July of 1978, and that to me was the first picture. When I made the exposure, I was convinced it was one of my best pictures ever, and till today I feel it's one of my best pictures. So it was very spontaneous. And the other thing I have, which is strange and not normal, is I go through pictures very fast and decide what I like and what I don't like. And moving a step away from my own work, my son was very interested as an amateur photographer before he became a professional photographer. And he showed me a bunch of his pictures, and I went through them really fast, and I picked out about 2, and he was upset that I was disregarding his work. And I said, no, I'm just responding very fast, and I have a sense of what I like and what I don't like. So typically, I don't spend that much time post-shoot in terms of deciding what I'm going to really dwell on. The time I spend dwelling on what I really want to print is when I spend the most time. So in a sense, that's the phase at which I come. And I do print a lot of my pictures. If I don't print them, then it's a picture that I've kind of disregarded.
Tell me a little more about that, because it's one thing. I love what you just said about, you take a look at a photograph and you sort of, it feels good. You like what you made. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has that thing that makes you feel like it's worthy of a print.
Right.
Can you quantify as what that is? Is it a feeling?
It is about feelings. In the end, it is about capturing a feeling. And for me personally, capturing a feeling is certain basic elements, that there is something within the space that I liked. Within that space, there's possibly a relationship, say, between 2 or 3 different objects. And the third and the most important element is there's something emotional about it, or something fascinating about it for me personally that captivates me. And it's interesting, I was having a conversation with my wife this morning, and I said, you know, I don't think my pictures are emotionally charged. She says, no, but they sort of capture what you're fascinated with. And you tend to be fascinated with different things, and your pictures capture that. And I think that's really what it is. So when I see those elements together, again, it's much more instinctive as opposed to analytical. It's like when I'm looking at it, yeah, this captures how I felt when I took the picture. This is what I want to convey to the world, and this is what I want to put on paper. That's what I go after.
You make the distinction between taking and making a photograph, which I completely am in agreement with. In the midst of a shoot, though, it's easy, especially when things get stressful and you're not sure what the hell you're doing, to fall back on just simply taking and just sort of absently pressing that shutter release button, hoping that things click, right? I know for me it's really important to be able to recognize that I'm in that state of mind, because I know I'm just going to come back with crap if I just stick to taking. So when you recognize that in the midst of the shoot, how do you sort of shift so that you go from taking to making?
So what I think I'm hearing you say is, if I'm in a shoot, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have an idea, because I'm a picture maker, and it's not working out, then on the fly I gotta, right? Yeah, okay. That doesn't happen that often because I am so specific. So it depends on what I'm doing. And because I'm shooting a lot of times for projects film, I don't have that luxury. I actually don't shoot that much, ironically. I'm always like, I need to shoot. I don't even feel like a photographer sometimes, because it's like, I haven't picked up my camera in like 3 months. And then all of a sudden I'll just shoot a lot. So I'll only shoot like maybe 3 rolls of film max, like, because I know what I want. But for example, with my Salt and Sea series, which is the black and white silver gelatin medium format that's all done in El Matador Beach in Malibu, that series I do both ways. So for example, I might have an image where I have, okay, I want this beautiful black woman with the skull and a white woman wrapping her arms around it, and it's very specific, and I'll get that shot. And then I'm there, so then I'll kind of experiment with doing other things, and just be creative with the moment. But I don't really have that much like leeway, because my shoots are getting more and more labor intensive, and specifically the one I'm working on now, I'm creating like sets for them and full body painting the models, which takes like 6 hours. So there's not a lot of like, oops, I gotta figure that out.
But that being said, you have this preconceived idea, and so it's exactly what you want. You set it up, you get that, but there's also serendipity. There's chance. There's just like something you couldn't have anticipated. How important is it to be sort of open to that and not just rigidly adhering to, this is exactly what I want to get?
Oh no, absolutely no. Look, I'm not someone who's like, this is it and that's it and I'm done. No, I mean, there's always a flow. There's like the shot that I want, and then there's let's play. And of course, if you're a photographer, a lot of times it's those, I just want to take that one last shot. And then you're like, thank God I took that shot because it's the best one, right? You're like, just for fun, let's just try something totally different. And a lot of times that's the one that I like the best.
Preparation for you, what's involved in terms of when you take a trip? What's necessary for you to be ready so that when you eventually arrive, at your destination, that you're ready to make the photographs you're meant to make?
I have a different approach. I'm not really thinking about that. It's like I have a camera ready, and it's like whatever grabs me at a moment, I will grab that moment and I will take a picture. So there's very little pre-planning, but I have one huge advantage over Javiera, I think, which is I'm an amateur. I have not made a dime shooting photographs. So that to me is just a very liberating thing. I'm not doing it for anyone. I'm not doing it for any particular purpose or objective other than strictly satisfying myself. So that's sort of the primary driver. And I should add at this point that my wife has always nagged me for not promoting myself. She has a very high regard for my work. She's here in the audience, and she's always said, why don't you have some museum look at your work and show it? Why don't you get some gallery to represent you? And I've repeatedly told her, I said, I enjoy the process more than worrying about trying to be shown or seen or whatever. So I think that's a big advantage.
I think we're married to the same woman. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So that's a big advantage, that when you're doing it as an amateur and you're not really driven by any external motivation, it's liberating in a sense for me personally.
That's the perfect word, liberating. It really is, because when you're photographing for yourself and you're not having to, be dependent on it to pay the rent and to pay the bills, there's this incredible freedom that you have there.
I mean, I still feel like an amateur. I don't think one ever feels, that you're there, wherever that is.
But that idea is a really important one, because I think there's the struggle, especially early on when you're making pictures, is self-justification. Spending all this time and money on this hobby, right? And especially people who aren't photographers, they just don't completely understand it. It's like, are you making a living in it? Are you selling anything? Well, then why? Right? They don't ask that of golfers, and they're just kicking a ball around. No offense to golfers out there, but I think that one of the important things, I think, for any photographer is this idea of being able, I'm making these pictures because I love making these pictures, period, right? And that can be enough. But inside, you can struggle with that, whether or not you're a dedicated amateur or someone who's aspiring to make a living from it, right? You have to make that okay for yourself to pursue to pursue it and spend all this time and effort and money into it. Early on, I'm sure that was a struggle for either of you. How did you sort of surmount that? It's
physically impossible for me to do something I don't want to do or am not inspired to do. I know what kind of work I could make and make bank, which is a bunch of beige art, which I am not interested in doing. I am very connected in the interior design world, and I see what they buy, and I'm just like, or like, the aerial shot of a beach somewhere. I mean, it's like I see the same images over and over and over and over again, and I'd be like, it'd be so easy for me to do that, but I can't. Like, I just physically can't do it. So I just do my weird art. And luckily, people are into it sometimes, so that's nice.
How about you?
Well, it's very hard to say what drives you. There are two aspects to it. One is, you could ask an opium user, why do you use it when it's just a waste of money? It's not producing any profits for you. On the other hand, it's something that gives me an amount of deep pleasure to do it. Why I chose it, how I got interested, I can't really explain. If going into my own psyche, it's not like something inspired me. It's like I was driven by it from when I was very young.
I love your story, because you were talking about you tried to build your own camera, right?
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, this idea of some kid trying to figure out, okay, I got to figure out how to create a leaf shutter, and just the sort of, even though it doesn't completely grasp what's involved in it, there's this obsession with I want to make not just this box that takes pictures, but it's the pursuit of making the photographs. It ultimately was about this goal about, I want to create this, and I need to create this, because at the time you didn't have ready access like we have now. You pick up a phone and they have a camera, but that wasn't available to you, and it took you a while before you were able to get a quote-unquote real camera in your hands.
Right, and there's a further story to it. I basically had to save money for about 5 years to buy my first camera, which was a Pentax KX which I still have and which still works perfectly without ever having been serviced. Yes.
It makes you value it all the more, that it took so long and so much effort to
Right.
finally get this thing. We take it for granted now. I mean, a picture-taking device is immediately available, you know, regardless of price, you know, it's there. Talk to me about there's a certain satisfaction that just comes from seeing, not necessarily just making the photographs, from just seeing and being that conscious and that aware that even when you're not actively making photographs, there's a pleasure that's derived from just observing the play of light against the building. For me, that's a daily thing. And talk to me about when you're not making photographs, the importance of observation.
I notice everything, and I'm always aware of light. Like everywhere I go, I notice light or shadows. I'm sensitive to light, bad lighting in places. I'm always turning the lighting down. Like I've been known to be the person that goes to parties and I'm like sliding on the wall, like dimming the lights, you know, because people just have this horrible overhead light. So I love playing with light, and I think it's really important as an artist or a creative person to observe life. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're constantly observing, and I think that it's just part of your process to be aware visually of your surroundings, and I just find light to be beautiful. I'm constantly stopping and being like, look at that lighting. So yeah, I'm aware of light.
Yeah, I would agree with Javiera about that. I think it's just seeing life and seeing things around you. I was someone who was completely uninterested in things botanical. And in my late 50s, I suddenly got interested in plants and started messing around in our garden at home. But then there came a point where I became obsessive about looking at trees and the shapes of leaves, and then starting to admire, how a trunk sort of twisted and turned and whatever. Started looking at the patterns on barks of trees. So I've taken pictures of those things. And now as I walk, even when I do something as simple as walking my dog down the street and bringing him back, I'm noticing little things like I might see a tree that's really fascinating. And in a sense, I feel I've started doing things that I guess people living in tribal communities in the Amazon or in the Borneo do. I've started marking spots with the shapes of particular trees or certain blossoms I saw on a tree at a certain point, that's the turning point where I have to turn on a particular street, or I turned on a street. I walk my dog and there are trees I look at based on the shape of the trunk at a particular point. And I think I have to come back here with my camera. So it's little things like that, something that you never thought about, that keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, I completely concur. I had a bad bout of sciatica, and part of my recovery was walking with my dog the same route around my neighborhood. So I was walking the same route every day, and because I was kind of limited in how far I could walk, I always had my camera with me because that was my only time to make photographs. And I live in Altadena, so there wasn't a whole lot there. There'd be other dog walkers, the occasional coyote, but it was the challenge of how can I see the familiar differently. It's the same route, and sometimes it would be just leaving 5 minutes earlier, 10 minutes later, for just seeing the difference in light. And it was amazing how I rediscovered my own community, my own neighborhood, just as a result of shifting the way that I perceived it, right? And that's really important because, a lot of people think, okay, when I go to that destination, be it India or the Dominican Republic or France, oh, that's the opportunity I'll have to really kind of like make pictures. But I think a real photographer is constantly seeing. They're constantly observing. When you're looking for inspiration, where do you go? Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be another photographer or other photographs.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Where do you go for inspiration? And it doesn't necessarily have to be other photographers.
Other than belonging to a group of photographers who meets every Saturday, that is more to exchange and show our pictures. But in terms of inspiration, honestly, I think when I'm by myself and I'm just exploring the world, I find inspiration. When we were driving down today to come over here, my wife and I were driving down, and I said, look, isn't this fascinating? I mean, this really shows aspects of Los Angeles where you have native black culture. Well, I shouldn't use the word native, but Angelino black culture here, right next to Mexican culture where you have, Louisiana spicy fried chicken next to Lupe's tacos. It's fascinating. And then you have people, vendors selling things. You could be in a market somewhere in Tijuana, a weekend market in Tijuana, and it's the same thing you see over here, which is so fascinating. So that's what grabs me. And it's something I intend doing, walking down a few miles along Manchester, taking pictures of people over there. But then I go into the San Gabriel Valley, and it's a completely different set of circumstances, conditions that inspire me.
Nature is a huge inspiration for me, and being in movement. So anytime I feel like I want to flesh out an idea, I go on a walk. And I just let my mind go. Because a lot of my ideas come to me from the subconscious mind. So I like to get out of my own brain for things to come through. And I find walking does that, so I can just relax. Also driving, like a road trip, love those because I get really inspired and very clear about ideas, and it's a good, anything that's in movement, planes, trains, cars, boats, whatever's in movement is a really good way for me to channel anything that I'm trying to work out. And also, if I'm feeling uninspired, I go look at art. I mean, I love art. My happiest place is to be in a museum. I love being in museums and galleries, and that's like a perfect day for me. So looking at other artists inspire me.
If anyone is interested in having a question, we have a mic there. So I want you to approach the mic and welcome any questions. You just talked about being in a group, and I think that one of the important things, one of the key things for any photographer to develop is beginning the process of sharing the work. Because photographers, we often create in isolation, and the choice of who we end up sharing the work with is really important. You can't, the internet can be a wonderful place to put out work, but that's not necessarily going to feed you in the way that you need to be fed. Tell me about the importance of finding the right community to nurture and encourage your work.
Well, it's kind of interesting you ask that because I've been shooting seriously since about the early 1970s, and I really didn't share my work with other people other than individuals until about 2017 is the first time I started showing my work to bigger groups. So in a sense, I was shooting very privately, very individually, and just doing my own stuff and having fun at it. as a group, it's very interesting to see the work of other people. It definitely leads to some amount of inspiration, gives you new ideas, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. There are some friends of mine from my group over here today, and I think that's a wonderful experience to be able to share the work. But there's always the risk of imitating the work of someone you think has done a wonderful job. That, to me, is a very risky thing. And bigger than imitating your peers is imitating yourself and repeating what you've already done. And I think Javiera had referred to that kind of a problem earlier, where she was talking about, you know, I've seen this done before, I'm not going to do it. And you've got to look at yourself sometimes and say, you know what, I've done this before, I'm not going to do it. The same thing with your friends, your peers.
So to understand your question, you're asking like, who do I share my work with, or how, or?
Who do you share your work with, and how do you find the right people to share your work
Do you
with?
mean to critique it, to give feedback, or just to share, just to put it out in the world?
It can be either, you know. I think like for me, it's like I want genuine insight and feedback into work. So there's only like a handful of people that I can share work, and then I know that whatever feedback is going to be helpful to me. It's not about I like it, I don't like it, oh, you can do this to make it better. I'm not really interested in hearing that. It's like, how do you feel about what I'm doing, and can you give me any insights that could help me further it?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm also, for a very, very, very long time, I wasn't interested in feedback because it didn't matter to me, because I was going to make what I was going to make. I needed to make the work. It didn't matter what others people thought, and I didn't want to be influenced by anyone else's opinions. Now, however, now I love feedback, but I'm very, very discerning about who I trust to give me feedback, because art is so subjective. Like, someone, it's like we're all looking at life, at people, at ourselves, at art through our own lens of our experiences. We're all here in this theater, and we've all had completely different lives, and each of us is a culmination of all those experiences, so none of us can really see the same thing. We're looking at everything through our own lens, so how can you have someone else look at something that has been your own experience? So for me, it's an intuitive thing. I am friends with a lot of artists, and there's some people that I really, really like. I can tell when we have the same taste. I'm like, okay, I can get feedback. There's like, literally, I can count like maybe 2 or 3 people that I will allow to give me feedback. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter unless you want to grow for yourself. But like, as far as the world goes, it's very dangerous to open yourself up to everyone's feedback, because it can be very confusing, and if you're easily influenced, it's going to influence your work, and you should just trust yourself to create the work that you want to create. And if you feel like, maybe I could grow, like, who can help me? Think about who you trust, and keep it really small.
Yeah, and just avoid people who want to volunteer their feedback without you prompting them.
Oh, people love giving unsolicited advice.
All right. My final question for each of you is a recommendation for a photographer that you think people should check out. And
There are 2 photographers that I think who are underappreciated and absolutely brilliant. One is Andre Cortez, and the other is Bill Brandt. Both of them absolutely brilliant, very, very different styles. And personally, to me, I think I was influenced a lot by Andre Cortez's work.
That's hard to narrow down. I have like so many. Right now, I'm currently obsessed with a South African photographer called Zanele Muholi, and amazing work, and I've seen their work a lot lately. But some classics, that I'm a big fan of is I love Peter Beard. I just love the weird ones, like Joel Peter Witkin just does something to my soul. He's very strange. But I also love whimsical, fantastical fashion photographers like Tim Walker is one of my favorite photographers. So it runs the gamut. And of course, Deanne Arbus. I love. Oh, and Sugimoto. Love Sugimoto's work. Highly recommend. Check him out. So.
Well, thanks to the both of you for sharing the stage with me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you
was
so much.
fun. Thank you.